If you've ever turned the radio on to a generic and soulless pop station, you may be familiar with Katy Perry. She rose to fame in 2008 and has since become one of the best-selling singers of all time. Over the years, she's gone on to do a number of strange things, like marrying Russell Brand and voicing Smurfette. But there is perhaps nothing stranger than Katy Perry's legal battle with a convent of nuns, which inadvertently killed one of them. First, let's go back to 1927, when Los Angeles was rapidly expanding and Katy Perry was nowhere close to existing. A man named Earl C. Anthony, who had made his fortune by owning radio stations and car dealerships, hired the architect Bernard Maybeck and the interior designer Harold Grieve to create his home. The result was this 8-acre estate with over 30,000 square feet of living space. Because that's just how car dealership owners lived back then, I guess. The house was on Waverly Drive in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. And if you're a Spanish speaker who thinks I just horribly mispronounced Los Feliz, you're just gonna have to accept the fact that the people of LA pronounce it Los Feliz for some reason. In the 1950s, the Waverly estate was sold to Daniel and Bernadine Donahue. But when Bernadine died in 1968, Daniel sold the house to a convent of nuns for $600,000. So, in 1971, when Katy Perry was -13 years old, the house was purchased by the Sisters of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. They were originally called the Daughters of the Most Holy and Immaculate Heart of the Blessed Virgin Mary, but I guess they got some marketing advice and opted for a name that rolls off the tongue a little better. The sisters lived there in happiness for several decades, maintaining the house with money they made from teaching. But over the years, the number of nuns in the convent began to decline. By 2011, the convent had gone from 52 sisters to only 5. So the archdiocese of Los Angeles kicked the nuns out and began planning a sale of the estate. And in April of 2014, they struck a deal to sell the property to Katy Perry for $14.5 million. Katy apparently planned to turn the convent into a personal mansion for herself, her mother, and her grandmother. But the nuns had other plans. Around the same time, they made a separate deal to sell the house to Los Angeles restaurateur Dana Hollister for $15.5 million. Hollister was hoping to turn the convent into a hotel. Say what you want about the nuns, but they did manage to negotiate a better price than the archdiocese. Apparently, the nuns had done some research on Katy Perry and didn't like what they saw. Sister Catherine Rose Holzman found an interview where Katy joked about having sold her soul to the devil, which was enough for Sister Catherine to make up her mind. She said she was appalled by Katy even mentioning selling her soul to Satan, as opposed to actually doing it, I guess. She also said that, in selling to Katy Perry, we feel we are being forced to violate our canonical vows to the Catholic Church. Another nun, Sister Rita Callanan, also did some research and said, I found Katy Perry and I found her videos, and, if it's alright to say, I wasn't happy with any of it. We'll let it slide this time, Sister Rita, but you should really control that temper. But I guess that statement wasn't mean enough for Sister Catherine, so she went one step further and said, Katy Perry represents everything we don't believe in. It would be a sin to sell to her. Sounds like that Super Bowl halftime show really left an impression. In January of 2015, the nuns issued a cease and desist to Archbishop Jose Gomez, who had put together the sale to Katy Perry. In the interest of avoiding a long legal battle over the property, Gomez decided that the best solution was for the nuns to meet Katy so they could see that she's not the godless Hollywood harlot they thought she was. So, on May 26, 2015, Katy Perry met with the 5 remaining nuns to settle their differences. According to Sister Catherine, Katy was late to the meeting. She didn't specify how late, but with the traffic in LA, I'm going to assume it was a 2.5-hour delay. Sister Catherine confronted Katy about selling her soul to the devil, but Katy assured the nun that she hadn't actually done so. To prove it, Katy showed the nuns a tattoo of the word Jesus on her wrist. I'm sure that was very reassuring, because we all know that nuns are famous for loving tattoos. It should be noted that Katy Perry does actually have religious roots. Her parents were both Pentecostal pastors who raised her with strict Christian values. And I'm not just talking about your standard attend church every Sunday kind of Christian values. As kids, Katy and her siblings listened to almost exclusively gospel music and were required to call deviled eggs angeled eggs. Apparently, they weren't even allowed to eat the cereal Lucky Charms because the word luck reminded their mother of Lucifer. Yeah, go ahead and take a moment to process that one. The family also struggled financially and were on food stamps, so I guess luck didn't like them much either. Katy actually began her music career with a contemporary Christian album under her birth name Katy Hudson. But when that album sold less than 200 copies, Katy did a complete 180 and released the singles I Kissed a Girl and You're So Gay to commercial success. And it seems her parents were completely fine with this, probably because they like money. But the Nuns had no need for money, already accepting $15.5 million from Dana Hollister. So all Katy could do was convince them of her dedication to the Lord. She did this by singing Oh Happy Day in her meeting with the nuns. But it probably didn't help that she had to pull out her phone to look at the lyrics. Sister Rita said, she pulls out her phone to get the words for Oh Happy Day. I was looking at my attorney thinking, what on earth? It also probably doesn't help that the lyrics aren't exactly complex. Needless to say, the meeting with Katy Perry didn't do much to sway the opinion of the nuns, although they gave Katy a polite applause to avoid the most uncomfortable silence of all time. Sister Catherine summed it up by saying, she was nice. She told us why she wanted the property and then sang a song and left. But the truth is that Katy Perry was not the only reason the nuns didn't like the deal. It really came down to control of the finances. You see, for most of the convent's existence, the entire place was funded by the nuns and operated independently from the Archdiocese of LA. But by 1992, the convent was down to only 35 sisters, and the church saw an opportunity. The Archbishop at the time, Roger Mahony, wrote to the Vatican and proposed that the Archdiocese would provide financial support to the convent, with the caveat that it could not be sold unless the Archdiocese approved the sale. But documents show that the Sisters of the Immaculate Heart of Mary continued to pay for the convent's maintenance without the help of the Archdiocese. Sister Catherine said, they never took care of us. The truth is that the church hasn't given us a dime ever for this house. But don't worry, the church did use the house for a different purpose, harboring criminal priests. From 1991 to 2008, Archbishop Mahony sent 3 different priests who were facing molestation charges to the convent to lay low. All 3 of them were arrested on the property and were later given prison sentences. The Archdiocese of Los Angeles reached a settlement in 2007 to pay $660 million to over 500 victims of clergy abuse. And as much as their tax exemption might help them, the church did not have that kind of money on hand, so they've been paying it off ever since. So although the Archdiocese promised to use the money from the convent sale to take care of the remaining nuns, Sister Catherine insisted that the money would actually go to paying off the abuse settlement and that the nuns won't see a dime of it. So Katy Perry found herself in the middle of a lengthy court battle between some nuns and the Catholic Church. And you would be forgiven for going into this thinking that the nuns and the church would be on the same side. But somehow, the church was on Katy Perry's side, and the nuns were on the side of a local restaurant mogul who they had asked to save them. When Dana Hollister was interviewed by Billboard, she said, "What I'm doing is really pure. I don't give a shit about the money. I met these sisters and realized, if I don't help, who is going to?" You really have to hand it to her for turning the creation of a boutique hotel into a gracious act of charity. Truly a good Samaritan. In July of 2015, the court ruled against Dana Hollister's bid to purchase the convent, calling it a bad deal, which probably has something to do with the fact that she was only offering $100,000 in cash, while Katy was offering $10 million up front. Things got even worse for Team Nun when Katy Perry and the Archdiocese sued Dana Hollister for interfering with the purchase. Perry's lawyers claimed that Dana took advantage of the vulnerable elderly nuns, who she malevolently convinced to oppose the Catholic Church. But based on what the nuns had been through, I can't imagine it took much convincing. The court ultimately ruled against Dana Hollister, convicting her of malice and fraud. She was ordered to pay $3.47 million to the Archdiocese and $1.57 million to Katy Perry in compensatory damages. If that wasn't bad enough, they later decided that she had to pay an additional $6.6 million to the Archdiocese and $3.3 million to Katy Perry in punitive damages, making Dana Hollister the first person who had to pay $15 million to not buy a house. Ironically, Dana Hollister did not have that kind of money on hand, which would explain why she was only offering the nuns $100K in cash. So she was forced to file for bankruptcy. In an effort to show their support, Sister Rita and Sister Catherine accompanied Hollister to bankruptcy court. In an interview with Fox 11 before the nuns went into court, Sister Catherine made this plea to Katy Perry.
"Please stop. It's not doing anyone any good except hurting a lot of people."
But in the midst of that court hearing, the 89-year-old Sister Catherine collapsed and died. Archbishop Gomez released a statement in which he said that he was sad to hear of her passing, which is a little bit like George W. Bush mourning the death of Saddam Hussein. So with a restaurant developer bankrupt and a nun dead, Katy Perry was free to buy the convent. Except there was still one person in her way: Pope Francis. Catholic law indicates that the sale of any property for over $7.5 million must receive official approval from the Vatican before it can go through, meaning the Pope has to take time out of his day to assess the Los Angeles real estate market. Ultimately, the Vatican decided that the sale could go through under the sole condition that Katy or the archdiocese finds a replacement for the convent's house of prayer, which was still being used by some priests. For a while, it seemed a property called Chateau Emmanuel in the LA neighborhood of Eagle Rock would be that replacement, but the deal fell through when the neighbors opposed it. And that seemed to be the point where everyone just kind of gave up. The convent still hasn't been sold, with the most recent asking price being $25 million. In an interview with the New York Post, Sister Rita said that she is now penniless and is still under attack from the archdiocese, who she claims broke into her apartment and took her documents. She also made the bold statement that Katy Perry has blood on her hands, because I'm sure Sister Catherine would have lived another 20 years if it weren't for Katy. But to her credit, Katy Perry has moved on. She's now in the midst of another property dispute, this time against a bedridden 83-year-old war veteran. We all have our quirks, and I guess Katy Perry just can't buy a house unless she's forcibly evicting an old person. So in the end, nothing really changed, except for the Nuns and Dana Hollister losing all their money. And if you thought that watching this video was a waste of time, imagine being any of the people involved in this. Now please consider subscribing or I'll seize your house in the name of the Pope.